Hey everyone, welcome to Founders 365 with me, Steven Haggerty. Today I'm joined by Nick Mayhew, who is the founder of Peak Business Finance. How you doing today, Nick?
Yeah, very well. Thank you, mate. Very well indeed. How you doing?
Yeah, good, man. Thanks for jumping on. I've been keen to get you on to discuss the shitstorm that we have at the moment. But before we jump into that, give me an overview of what Peak Business Finance do and offer.
Yeah, so we're a commercial finance brokerage based out of Leighton Buzzard, which no one's heard of. So near Luton, near Milton Keynes.
Yeah.
We arrange business loans and property-based finance. So on the business side, it's things like your unsecured business loans, invoice finance, asset finance, that kind of thing. It's aimed at sort of improving cash flow and helping expand. On the property side, it's your things like your commercial mortgages, buying units to trade out of. And building ground up developments, that sort of thing. So
Good, man. How long have you been doing this?
A couple of years now. So prior to that, I was working directly for a lender, an invoice discounting lender, which was.
And you thought, you know what? I'm going to go alone. I'm going to go for it and do it.
Yeah, it's good fun. I learned a lot doing it, but then I thought might as well work for every lender and see how.
Yeah, man, why not? Why not?
I haven't looked back yet, so yeah, it's all good.
I'm going to jump into a couple of questions later on about how you found everything in terms of growing that sort of business. But let's talk about why we're here. We've got the virus. It's causing a few disruptions in business, just a little bit, I think. Rumors have it McDonald's have shut down today.
Yeah.
I mean, people are literally losing their mind. But in terms of the information that is being portrayed out there in the media that we're seeing, what, from your understanding, can people be doing or businesses be doing to help? I don't know if the right word is safeguarding or just help accessing funds or accessing avenues that will help them survive.
Yeah, so the government's obviously released this amazing package of support to help businesses. I think there's still a few businesses that feel they're left out of it, but I think they'll be swept up in the sort of coming weeks. So we've got a few different options. There's obviously the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme that's being rolled out. There's grants on offer for businesses that pay. They have like rates relief or rate exempt.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's different options there. In terms of the grants, by the looks of it at the moment, it looks like the local authorities will get in contact with those eligible to claim those. So it's a little bit stressy because you kind of think, oh, am I eligible? Am I not eligible? But
yeah,
just have to wait and see. There's also the funded package released by the government where they're covering 80% of, or offering to cover 80% of payroll for furloughed employees, which is a new word to all of us.
Have they given a timeline on that as well? Like how long they will cover that for?
Off the top of my head, I can't remember. I've not, because I haven't
seen anywhere obvious online that says, "Oh, we'll do it for 3 months, or we'll do it for 2 months, or 6 months."
Yeah, because I haven't got staff, I haven't really looked so closely into that. To be fair, I know there's a few companies looking at it, but I think even a lot of accountants are quite unclear at the moment as to whether, because it seems to be it's a reimbursement. So the company that has the staff still needs to have the working capital to pay their staff, and then they should be able to get 80% back. What the time frame is to reclaim that money is another story, but I think that'll be sort of more will be revealed over the next couple of weeks.
Because I think the mindset is very much people are slipping into panic stations, right? Slipping, or they are in panic stations.
Yeah.
Because of the amount of unknown, like this is the first time something of this magnitude has happened in this country / the world. I think, was it Boris that said, in generations, or Trump said in generations? One of them said it. They both look similar. So it is that massive unknown in terms of what people can do. But with the help that the government in the UK here is providing, one, do you think people will be able to access it quick enough to like save them, basically? Because some people are literally living, hand to mouth whilst running a business. And secondly, do you think those funds will be able to be distributed in a fair way?
I'm a bit more optimistic now than I was last week. Last week, I was pretty much like, no, they're going to make an absolute mess of it. And I was pretty much saying that the alternative route, the alternative lending marketplace, is probably the only way, and the only funders that will deliver at speed. In the last week, I've seen so many alternative funders pull out of the market, particularly on their unsecured offering. The ones that are remaining are declining very quickly, much quicker than they were a couple of weeks ago. So they're probably wanting to look active and, oh, we're still lending, but
they're not.
Active, but they're not doing anything.
Yeah.
So I think the wording of the scheme is that it's the coronavirus business interruption loan scheme is for businesses that don't fit a lender's normal criteria, but are a viable funding proposition, have been affected by the coronavirus. So,
but when you say they don't fit the normal criteria, what typically is that?
This is the thing; it varies bank to bank. So normally banks have quite a for unsecured lending, they've got quite an idea of what they like. But I don't think it's as strict as what people say. Because for the deals that the banks do like, they'll do it fast and at a cheap rate. So a couple of weeks ago, well, probably close to the start of the year now, actually, did a client who was buying some vans. We did that through Lloyd's, and we turned it around in a week and on something like 3% APR per year. The unsecured lenders were coming in at 3% a month.
Wow.
And they were only looking to do £10,000, and they were taking their time with it. So I think I've potentially been maybe a little bit unfair to banks in that when they do like something, they'll do it quite quickly. Yeah, they'll jump on it. So yeah, but in terms of what is their normal criteria, yeah, it varies from bank to bank, but there's general things that they're looking at. So they want to see at least 2 years trading history, ideally profitable. So it's got to be a business that's been affected by the virus. I mean, if you were losing money 3 months ago, if you had problems 3 months ago, then
this isn't like a quick win for you.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a few of those will slip through the cracks. You know, a few people will try it and they'll get lucky. But for the most part, it's aimed at businesses who, you know, have been trading well. So like for myself, I've had quite a few deals fall through, but I've been trading well at the start of the year. Technically, I'd probably qualify for one of these.
Yeah, exactly. Did I see somewhere that you said that this scheme is just a different scheme and that they've renamed really quickly to push it through?
Yeah, so they've renamed the Enterprise Finance Guarantee Scheme to the Coronavirus Business Interruption Loan Scheme, which is
more snappy.
A lot of syllables, but yeah, so it tells you exactly what it does. So the idea of the Enterprise Finance Guarantee would be that if I'm a lender, if I'm a bank and I wanted to lend your company money, maybe you wouldn't have the necessary balance sheet assets to justify the lend. So what I'd then do is go to the government and say, look, we're looking at a little bit more for this client. Could you provide us a guarantee effectively? That was up to 80% of the loan amount. A lot of the lenders used to use that as a top up. So there's very few that offered it as a standalone facility. So they'd have their own like criteria of unsecured loans, for example. And then occasionally, if there were certain levels they couldn't get to within their own underwriting criteria, but it's still justified a lend. So we typically found that it doesn't turn a non-lend into a lend. It turns a lend into a bigger lend.
I've never heard the word lend said so much in the
minutes. All the time. But often what we found with these types of loans is they're used for top-ups of asset-backed facilities. So you'd see companies that so if they offered invoice discounting, which is borrowing off the back of your unpaid invoices, if maybe they were offering an 80% drawdown, then the point of the EFG scheme would be to get maybe an extra 20%, which you'd get that on a term over maybe sort of 1 to 3 years. But it just gives you that little push. But there's obviously a lot of security there already. So yeah.
In layman's terms, the profitable LTD business, what do you think they should be doing? Like, if you were advising someone who had staff, who had sort of, you know, been trading 5 years, etc., what, in terms of the steps they should be taking now, what would you be advising on that?
And they've been affected by the virus.
Yeah, let's say, like, for example, one guy I know on Facebook has retail shops, has had to close. Obviously, very much in the unknown about staff paying and all that kind of stuff. So for him, it's where does he go and what should he be doing?
Yeah, for things like, for the really bad sectors, your travel, your hospitality, your hotel, your restaurants.
All the fun sectors, basically, isn't it?
Yeah, all the fun sectors. I'd probably break down and cry if I was them, to be honest. I wouldn't even know where to start. I mean, because for most businesses, there's going to be a temporary issue, but long term, it will get back to normal. But they also might have the margins to justify it. The thing with the business sectors affected is they're also high volume, low margin sectors.
Yeah.
So restaurants aren't, unless they're really expensive restaurants, they aren't making loads and loads of margin. They get it by selling loads of meals and loads of drinks and stuff like that. So it would be where to start. I mean, I'd probably start with firstly speaking to my creditors. So, you've got a great PR backed excuse to, reason to justify a late payment at this point. But I'd say, like, look, we're all in the same boat here. I'm going to need a bit of time. Basically, don't foreclose on me. Then you'd probably go down your costs and see what your biggest costs are. But it's probably going to be staff, in which case you might have to furlough them, as we say now. And yeah, it's pretty tricky for those businesses, because obviously if we have a lockdown that we might find out in half an hour.
Yeah, 8:30, Boris.
Yeah, it's unsure when they're going to be able to commence trading again. And I think that period is pretty critical, because if you look at a business that maybe would have a gap but should continue trading again. So a lot of people in building sites that I work with, obviously if we go on lockdown, they'll be affected too. But if we didn't, then it sounds like they've still got work in the pipeline.
Yeah,
we'd be starting sort of.
I was speaking to a guy, an old client of mine today, actually, who owns a carpentry business, but he does sort of like, he builds houses, and he said that the construction industry is effectively unaffected, but that is only because the majority of workers are self-employed. They're not staff. So for them, it's like the livelihood. And you mentioned earlier that there's a little bit of a gap between people that the government has offered help, and that gap is the self-employed people, right? It's the people that have the little Etsy stores that are actually turning over a decent amount of money to pay their mortgage, all the way to your builder who's doing 100, 200 grand a year self-employed, which again, like, he should definitely be limited and doing his accounts better anyway. But we have that in this situation. So do you think that this in itself is going to change the way in the future, if we future pace this a little bit after all this has settled down? Do you think this is going to have a huge effect in the way that money is lent and resources are dealt with in terms of businesses, and self-employed people are treated and how they're looked upon?
Long term, I think lending seems to always return when there's good times. It always seems to return to going a bit more reckless. Short term, I mean, underwriters are panicking. I've been speaking to underwriters directly, which is always a fun experience, but because they see the world so cynically and critically, because they see all the people who don't pay their debts and all the excuses they come up with. But I've been speaking to some, and they've been saying, I actually can't decide what to do on this case, because on the one hand, it's a sound business. This has done really well, done well up to this point, and then they'll say, but can't see how it's going to make it through the next 8 weeks. You think, well, you loan them money, and they might, but then at the same time, they're thinking, well, if we loan them the money, do we get it back?
Yeah.
So there's that. So there'll be that impact there, because a lot of these, there's a lot after the last recession, banks tightened their belts in terms of lending, particularly on business lending, which is what gave rise to the alternative lending market. So your funding circles, your IWOCAs, your market invoices, they started on sort of lower credit businesses. Then they sort of graduated themselves into being a more sort of premium lender in terms of low price and better clientele, so to speak, which then gave rise to another couple of sets of lenders beneath. and it's the ones at the very bottom. So they're charging high interest rates, or 50 to 100% interest rates, daily repayments, that kind of thing. Those are the guys that are really affected at the moment. They're panicking. And so if
paying, right, they're the ones that are first in the list where people just go, no, I'm going to stop you, and I'm going to not work anymore.
People have stopped paying already. So they were saying, because I was having calls last week from people like, yeah, they've stopped paying us. They're going to make people redundant, and then the next day that person's gone. There's a lot of them in that sector. One of them in particular, their main sector was hospitality. So they're dealing with bad credit hospitality.
Wow.
So I think in the short, it has affected their lending decision. They've tightened their criteria. They're tightening who they're lending to. All the lenders at the moment are reviewing their criteria. I think if the government scheme wasn't there, the banks actually wouldn't lend.
It would just be on complete pause.
Yeah, except for very, very investment grade businesses, who are basically unaffected, because there will be a few businesses that are completely unaffected or relatively unaffected, and they'll use this time as a opportunity to get some cheap money for their expansion plans that they were going to do anyway, that they probably could have funded with cash. But yeah, it's definitely going to affect. I think it's going to affect lending decisions going forward. Right now, it has, because you can't get a gauge on default rates, and there's no clue on what's going to happen tomorrow. We were told not to go out, and then if you see all the pictures of people at the weekend, everyone's everywhere. So now we're looking like we're going to go on a lockdown. 2 weeks ago, half of us were joking about this virus as just being a bit of a bad cold, and now it's a pretty big issue. So
it's literally like a movie. I keep saying it.
It's like 28 days later, isn't it? So I'm expecting to start seeing zombies running down the street, and I'm pretty unprepared if that happens. But
I think the majority of people in the UK are fairly unprepared if that happens. All they want to do is get to the pub. But for you to, like you mentioned, in terms of first and foremost, I think the Boris announcement at 8:30 is going to do two things. One, it's going to give people some answers in terms of timeline. So if he goes, look, we're on a lockdown for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or 4 weeks, at least that gives people that almost permission to not worry about things, right? I know people in France and Spain and Italy where they're obviously on lockdown, and one of the benefits of lockdown is that they just go, well, it's all out of my control now. Everything's paused, everything's on hold, no one can really do anything. So in terms of the mental health of the population, I think a lockdown will be a real benefit. In terms of the health of businesses, there's obviously still many ways that businesses can thrive in this industry, right? In this current climate.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of businesses are as well. A lot of businesses have really taken to this remote plan. It's not a plan; it's a remote way of working now. And I think it's one of those things that shows the importance of planning, which I fly by the seat of my pants. I'll admit that freely, and it's not a good way to run a business and operate in general. And you can see that, but it's hard to know that unless you go through tough times like this. We're probably going into a recession. It's going to be a tough couple of years, I think. And people sort of always bang on about the merits of planning and having continuity plans and disaster recovery plans and things like this. And you always go yeah, that's a document for the HR folder. Brilliant. There it is. I've ticked my box there. But actually being able to refer to a plan in situations like this. I mean, because I deal with a number of different, not only clients, but also funders, you can really see the difference between those that have prepared and those that haven't. Those that haven't prepared have quickly got a Ring Central account, and it's just going to swarm all the mobiles, and whoever answers it takes the call, and you end up just not getting your call answered. The ones that are prepared for it, they've had this plan in place for years, since the Brexit announcement. Really, a lot of these people have had these plans in place. And I think that's more of what I'd like to see. Whether or not it's going to happen is, I think we'll get to good times again, and we'll all stop planning again. But I think that's a key part that needs to change in a lot of businesses. Really, it's planning, it's forecasting. I think the role of the accountant needs to be more and more strengthened. A lot of people they see their accountants once a year. They need to be
an asset rather than just a problem.
Yeah, well, they see him as just like a bookkeeper, whereas your
Yeah.
accountant should be, your accountant should be the person who helps you make strategic decisions. I mean, I'm not an accountant myself, but I really respect the views of accountants because they can look at stuff on not just ways on how you can save tax, but also, how you actually plan your business effectively, how you look at your margins, how you look at your cost per acquisition and stuff like this. And I think this is really important for people to see, and I hope that they realize through this that having a good trusted financial partner on board is going to make a big difference, because there's also a lot of businesses that have scuttled cash away, and now they're just sitting on a war chest of like 10 months worth of cash. This doesn't affect them at all. They just sit there. They can choose whether they want to pay their staff, if they need to let them go. There's a lot of businesses that may be taking a bit more of a clinical view on it, and they're just saying, well, this is a great time to make some staff redundant, and whether that's right or wrong, but they've got that option to just make that callous decision without having to worry about going out of business next month. So I'm hoping we see that change in attitude. It's certainly changed my eyes to be like, right, we need to start saving for the next recession. You kind of hear people like Rob Moore saying it on his podcast, and you're just like, yeah, right, mate, I'll do that.
All right, mate. Yeah.
But it's true. I think that's something that needs to change, but whether or not it will have much of an effect, I don't know. But that's the change I'd like to see. I also think, I don't know how this remote working, because it's kind of like a great covert like mass study on remote working, how that's going to play, because
that's the interesting part, because it's forced so many companies to remote work that would refuse to do it beforehand. They would say that it wouldn't work for them, but actually I think that it's going to show a lot of businesses that firstly, I think after this, I think staff in general will be requesting remote working a lot more, and companies are going to have a lot harder excuse to say no, because they've done it for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, however long it is. A few people I've spoken to, that are working for very large businesses, they've been told that they'll be working from home up until September already. So it's like, that's what, 4 months, 5 months, or whatever it is, of remote work. That, like you said, it is basically this huge business study of, actually, one, do you need that fancy office space in London? 2, how many employees do you need to make remote working work? And then the knock-on effect of that actually, if this experiment, let's call it, does work, then that's going to have a huge knock-on effect in terms of commercial leases, office leases, all these other avenues, because businesses would straight away just go, actually, we don't need a 100-desk office. We need a 50-desk office that is hot desking, and people can just come and go.
Yeah. Well, I sometimes think of it on a real long term, whether it actually starts to decentralize the city. Because obviously the way cities are, they're broken, really. They're a nightmare to drive around. You have to get crammed into a little
glued together.
Yeah, you've got to cram yourself into a little tube to get from place to place, and no one really likes commuting either. So I think it's a big thing. There's going to be a lot of potential mental health side effects, because it's very lonely working from home. I've done it for 3 years, and I'm probably a little bit crazy because of it. You need that social interaction. But I think also as well, what is it they say? After 21 days, you form a habit. So if you stop commuting, and then all of a sudden you're exercising in the morning, you're spending time with your kids if you've got them, you're able to sort of get more, blend your work and personal life. Yeah, that is right. Work and personal life more effectively. I think it's going to be hard to kind of
go back to normal.
To go back to normal, and do that 3-hour round commute each day. I think there's going to be more sort of flexi time. But I think there's going to be a big difference between those companies that are prepared to work remotely versus those who aren't. But equally, the other part of me just thinks, it's just going to go back to normal, and nothing.
The cynical part of you that has no hope.
Yeah, I mean, that's a big part of me, I guess. But we'll see what happens.
No, but I think it's going to be very much more staff-led, value-based decisions, because there's a lot of companies now, you mentioned it earlier, that are really showing their ethics, I would say, is the right word to put it. Even if they're sitting on a cash pile, they're still axing staff. They're even Grant Cardone, the Mr. 10x guru that there is, fired like 80 of his 180 staff 2 nights ago.
Oh, why don't you just sell more? Well, that would be his prediction. Just sell more.
Yeah, exactly, right.
And he anyone, right?
Exactly, but he's also one of the guys that used to preach that his business was recession proof, and yet he called a staff meeting and fired 80 of his staff, and then apparently in their exit email it was, yeah, so you're not going to communicate with us anymore, only your lawyer can. So it's like super Americanized in terms of that whole like 2 weeks notice, actually no you don't, see here's your box. At least in the UK, staff are a little bit more protected in that sense, but really they're not. You know, they just like to think they are.
No, a lot of people have been let go overnight. I mean, there's companies that got rid of their whole broker team. I sent an email to a broker relationship manager today. It bounced. I called him. He's been fired or made redundant. So you know,
I'm good friends with someone similar to yourself in the sense in like a very similar business. I got a text the other day saying I'm no longer with the business. You know, been made redundant, and it's super sad, of course, and it shows that for me, I think it is really forcing the hand of founders to be a lot more long-term strategy rather than like, oh, we're doing really great this month. How long can we keep this up for? How long, when is this going to go? Because I think a lot of people were in a bubble and they didn't realize it. And that bubble's just been popped. And now they've gone, crap, we need to like firefight now. Let's get rid of everyone. But at least we've got the name or whatever. So in 2 months' time, we can just hire a broker and we're back to normal sort of thing, which is interesting.
Yeah,
couple of last questions, Nick.
Sorry.
With this Boris announcement today, with the, you know, if he does do a lockdown, for example, what businesses do you think will not be affected at all?
Wow. Okay. What do I not think?
Bet you weren't expecting that.
No, I was, but I got some like probably porn sites, streaming sites, video makers. Anything sort of entertainment driven that doesn't require people to leave the house. Delivery, I mean, as long as food deliveries are allowed, certain
delivery must be booming at the moment.
Yeah, so certain takeaways, if they're still allowed to deliver, or if they're still willing to go into work, which a lot of them will be, I'm sure they're gonna probably thrive through this as well. People aren't gonna want to leave, you know, necessarily leave the house if they don't want to.
I think that actually on the flip side of this question is if he doesn't announce a lockdown, I think there'll be so much uproar about how he's putting people at risk.
Yeah. I wish people could just decide to not leave the house, but you know, that's
apparently we can't. Apparently, like where I live in Essex, they've had to close county parks because people were just basically going for picnics and thinking it's the midsummer and they've got a bank holiday weekend. It seems the UK population really struggle with just keeping safe and not being knobs and staying 2 meters apart.
Yeah, it was hot. It was a nice weekend as well, wasn't it? That's the thing. It's quite cruel. Yeah, it's been awful. It's the first nice weekend we've really had this year, isn't it?
Exactly. Well, then you get the conspiracy theories that this coronavirus has cleared up all the pollution and it was man-made to do so to save the planet and all that kind of stuff. Hey,
well, there's an argument that actually the virus could have positive effects in terms of pollution, because there was a study done when they cleared up the pollution in Beijing for the Olympics. They compared it to different areas in China. There was lower rates of infant and elderly mortality.
Wow.
When compared during the same period compared to other areas. So if you compare that to the virus and over the world, maybe there might be the same effect.
Yeah.
But then you sort of miss out on other things. The fact that if you've got anything else other than the virus, you're probably not going to get seen to, because it's kind of like the on-brand thing of, to get medical treatment, isn't it? Really, that's the
and also the fact that most medical places are now closed and hospitals are now over flooded. And the NHS is overworked and understaffed. I think it's again another positive in this weird world that we currently live in. I think the after effect of this is actually more people are going to care about the NHS system. More people are going to say, you know what, actually we do need more doctors, we do need more staff, we do need to do that. And there's even going to be more pressure on that, which is a great thing. Nick, listen, my last question to you is, in the current time, if you could give 3 bits of advice to any business, maybe either to generate cash flow or to sort of help them extend their runway, what would those 3 tips be?
Get paid as quickly as possible. Pay your bills. Take as long as you can to pay your bills within credit terms. So don't like screw people, but
Call your credit.
Yeah, well, like just ask for credit. And what would my last bit be? Just make a forecast and try and stick to it.
Yeah,
I'd say.
And keep your head up, man. Keep your head up, people. Like, it may be crap at the moment, but it's not going to last forever.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think keep your head up and make sure you collect your cash. I think it's one thing to focus on sales, but if people don't pay or they don't pay on time, that's a bigger problem than not having sales. You're better off collecting it, and what you've got, if that's able to cover you, then that's changed recently.
It's a really good time for you to evaluate how your customers see you in terms of assets and the value that you bring to them. Because if they're paying you quickly, you're seen as you're obviously seen as a higher value to them. If they're paying you slowly, you're probably not up the pecking order as far as you think you should be. So it's a really good time for you to evaluate. Nick, listen, if anyone wants to get in touch with you, speak to you about finance, speak to you about funding, what's the best way for them to get in touch?
Either PM me on Facebook. My website's pretty naff, but it's peakbusinessfinance.co.uk. You can speak to me on my live chat, or send me an email, nick@peak businessfinance.co.uk.
Perfect. Nick, thank you so much for jumping on this, and I've thoroughly enjoyed our chat, and I'm sure you will come back on in a couple of months' time and see what kind of storm we're at then. Thank you very much. Thanks everyone for watching and listening. This has been Founders 365 with me, Steven Haggerty. And remember to subscribe on Apple, YouTube, wherever we are and wherever you're listening from. Thanks, everyone.
Brilliant sound.